Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to jump right into the middle of a really tense situation. It was all caught on video. You can find it on YouTube. The channel is called Midwest Safety, and the video is called When Teens Outnumber the Cops. It really makes you think about how complicated policing can be and how it all ties into community relations. You really feel like you're right there. It's raw footage. And it gives us a glimpse into what happens when police officers encounter a big group of teenagers.
Yeah. It's really interesting to see, something that feels like an everyday scene suddenly takes a sharp turn and escalates so quickly. And this video, it actually touches on a lot of the issues that we're seeing play out all across the country right now. Mm-hmm. Things like, youth crime and how police respond in those high pressure situations, and the tensions that can sometimes exist between law enforcement and communities.
Okay, so let's dive right into this video. It starts with police officers responding to a call. There's a fight going on involving like 20 teenagers. And right away, you can hear the officers, they're trying to figure out who actually lives in the apartment complex and who doesn't. The whole thing feels super chaotic. There's teens yelling, kids running off in every direction. And it's really clear that the officers, they're outnumbered. What are your initial thoughts here?
Well, it just immediately raises questions about the resources that are available to police departments, especially when it comes to, community policing. If you think about the bigger picture here, incidents like this with so many people involved, it can really strain police resources, and it makes it so much harder to de-escalate the situation effectively.
Yeah, it does make you wonder if just having more officers there at the scene from the get-go, if that might have helped things stay a bit calmer. But things really start to heat up when the officers, they start questioning the teens. They're demanding they identify themselves. They want proof that they live there. You can practically feel the tension rising, and that's when some of the teens end up in handcuffs, accused of loitering and prowling. This feels like a turning point in the video.
Yeah, this is where it gets really interesting. You've got these legal complexities coming into play now with stop and identify laws, and those laws, they actually differ from state to state, which adds another layer of complexity. And then you've got this potential for misunderstandings on both sides, especially when you're dealing with young people. They may not fully understand their legal rights, or they may not know how to interact with law enforcement properly.
Right, and the situation, it feels like it's on the verge of boiling over when a mother shows up, and she finds out that the police have detained her son and daughter. And you can totally understand why she's so upset. She tells the officers that her son, he was actually defending a girl who was being attacked. And then her daughter, she stepped in when the police were trying to detain him. How does her perspective, how does that change things for you?
Well, her coming onto the scene like that, it's a powerful reminder that we're not just looking at a legal situation here. Mm-hmm. We're dealing with real people and their families. We see the mother's emotional response, her protective instincts taking over. And it just reminds us that these encounters, they're rarely straightforward. Mm-hmm. And we can't ignore those personal stories and motivations that are part of every situation.
It definitely adds another layer of complexity to the whole encounter. We find out later that the daughter ends up facing some pretty serious charges. Felony obstruction, loitering and prowling, and battery on an officer. Her brother and a few others who were involved in the incident, they're released to their parents. The mother, though, she insists that her kids were unfairly targeted, while other kids who were actually involved in the fight, were allowed to leave. How does that make you rethink what happened?
Well, her statement really forces us to consider, was there any bias involved in how the officers handled this situation? And it highlights the difficulty of trying to maintain order while making sure that everyone is treated fairly and justly. Whenever you have allegations of police misconduct, it's crucial to have thorough investigations. And you have to ensure accountability. That's the only way to really maintain that public trust in law enforcement.
You're right. Transparency is absolutely crucial. The video ends with the mother, and she's voicing her frustration. And you can feel this deep sense of injustice. She really believes that her kids were singled out, and it just exposes how deep the mistrust can run between law enforcement and certain communities. It feels like this incident, it could have lasting repercussions.
It's a crucial point to consider. This video, it's not just showing us one isolated event. It reflects those broader discussions we're having nationwide about police reform, the concerns about racial profiling, and that real need for better communication and understanding between police officers and the communities they're serving. It feels like this whole encounter, it's become a microcosm of these bigger issues we're facing as a society.
It's definitely a powerful statement about where we are as a nation. This video, it really left me with a lot of questions. Let's unpack some of the legal terms that came up, like loitering and prowling, which the officer mentioned as a reason for detaining some of the teens. What exactly does that mean from a legal standpoint?
That's a great question. Laws against loitering and prowling, they're meant to address behavior that seems suspicious, something that might suggest criminal intent, even if no actual crime has been committed yet. But here's where it gets interesting. The specific requirements for these laws, they can change depending on the state. But generally, they say that officers have to have reasonable suspicion that a person is involved in some kind of unlawful activity before they can actually, step in.
It's not just about being somewhere you shouldn't be. There has to be more to it to justify detaining someone.
Exactly. It's not enough for someone to just be in a public space, even if it's late at night. The officer needs to be able to point to specific things, specific facts that led them to believe that the person was either about to commit a crime or was already in the middle of doing something illegal. And this is where it can get a little tricky.
That makes sense. But in a situation like this, with all these teenagers, some of them maybe even with prior records, wouldn't it be easy for an officer to kind of assume the worst and maybe misinterpret what their intentions really were?
That's a crucial point you've brought up. These loitering and prowling laws, they're often criticized because they're seen as too vague. They're open to subjective interpretation.
Yeah.
And that could lead to discriminatory enforcement. Critics argue that it gives officers too much power to decide, and that could result in racial profiling and the unfair targeting of certain groups, especially young people of color. It becomes a question of, are these laws actually being applied equally to all racial and socioeconomic groups?
That's really interesting because in the video, you see that tension playing out in real time. The mother, she genuinely believes that her children were singled out because they are Black, while other kids who were in that fight, who might have been of a different race, were let go. Do you think that's a valid concern?
Well, that perception of being treated unfairly, that's really at the core of a lot of the distrust between communities of color and law enforcement. And it goes beyond just this one incident. It points to those systemic factors that contribute to these negative perceptions. It's not just about individual officers. It's about how the entire system operates.
Yeah.
We have to acknowledge these historical and systemic issues if we want to create real change.
Absolutely. Acknowledging those issues feels like that's the first step towards making any progress. The video also highlights this whole idea of obstruction of justice, which is a charge that gets used a lot in these situations. We hear the officer, he keeps accusing the daughter of obstruction because she questioned why she was being detained and she didn't immediately answer his questions. Can you kind of break down how that charge typically gets applied in these situations?
Obstruction of justice. It's a pretty broad legal term, and it covers a lot of different actions that could be seen as interfering with the legal process. Now, when it comes to encounters between citizens and police, this charge often comes up when someone's seen as preventing an officer from doing their duty. This could be refusing to give their name, getting in the way of an arrest, or destroying evidence, but there are a lot of nuances to it.
So in this case specifically, the daughter questioning the officer, not giving her information right away, was that enough to be considered obstruction? It seems like a gray area.
It's important to understand that just asking questions or disagreeing with an officer, it doesn't automatically mean obstruction of justice. However, if someone's behavior escalates to the point where it's actually stopping the officer from conducting their investigation or making a lawful arrest, then it could be considered obstruction. It really comes down to intent and to what extent the person's actions actually interfered with the officer's ability to do their job.
That line seems incredibly thin, especially in a situation as chaotic as the one we see in this video. It seems like it would be so easy for misinterpretations to happen on both sides.
And that's exactly why it's crucial for both the officers and the people they're interacting with to be well informed about their rights and responsibilities during these encounters. Open communication and a commitment to de-escalation, they can often prevent these situations from getting out of control and ending up in court. We need to remember that the goal should always be to resolve things peacefully and fairly.
This is already giving us so much to think about, and we also hear the officer mention battery on an officer, which is another serious charge. Can you explain what that actually means and what kind of consequences the daughter could be facing?
Battery on a law enforcement officer, that's a serious offense. And it can have some significant penalties. Usually it involves any intentional and unlawful physical contact with an officer, so that could be like hitting, kicking, shoving, even spitting on an officer. The severity of the charge really depends on the specifics of what happened and the intent behind the action.
From what we see in the video, it seems like the daughter might have hit the officer when she was trying to intervene in her brother's arrest. Do you think that's a fair assessment of what happened?
Well, that's what it looks like in the video, but we have to remember that we're only seeing a small part of the whole story. We only have one perspective. And the details of what actually happened during that alleged battery, that would have to be thoroughly investigated and ultimately proven in court. We have to be careful about making judgments based on just one video recording.
Of course, we need to let the legal process play out. What kind of consequences could she be facing if she ends up being convicted of this charge?
The penalties for battery on an officer, well, they can vary a lot. It depends on the state and the specific circumstances of the case. It could range from a misdemeanor charge with a relatively short jail sentence and fines to a felony charge with a much longer prison term. The outcome is going to depend on a few things, including whether the daughter has any prior criminal history, how serious the alleged battery was, and the arguments made by both the prosecution and the defense.
That's a pretty wide range of potential outcomes. It really underscores how serious these charges are and how big of an impact they could have on a young person's life. The stakes are definitely very high in this situation.
Absolutely. This case really shows us how important it is to make sure that the legal process is fair and thorough so that everyone's rights are protected and justice is served. The outcome of this case is likely going to have a significant impact on everyone involved, not just the daughter. We have to remember that the legal system, it has this huge responsibility to make sure things are fair and to protect individual rights.
We've already uncovered so much in this deep dive, and we've only just begun to explore this incident. There are still so many unanswered questions that need our attention. What caused that fight between the teenagers in the first place? Was the police response appropriate considering the circumstances? And what will the long-term consequences be for the daughter who's facing these serious charges? These questions, they stay with you long after the video ends.
You're right. This video, it's like a launching pad for even deeper conversations.
Yeah.
We need to remember that this one event, it's a part of a much bigger, more complex story.
Yeah.
It raises those crucial questions about how we approach community relations, the effectiveness of police tactics, and the role of the legal system in our society. All of these things, they deserve further exploration and careful thought.
It feels like we've opened up this Pandora's box of issues that demand our attention and careful consideration.
This incident also shines a light on the challenges that police face when they're dealing with young people, especially in these highly charged situations. There's a lot of discussion right now about the best de-escalation techniques. And are officers getting enough training to work with teenagers who might be acting out or, reacting emotionally in the heat of the moment?
Yeah, you can definitely feel that tension in the video. The officers seem to take a very authoritative approach. They're demanding compliance, and they resort to handcuffs pretty quickly. Do you think a different approach could have de-escalated things? Could it have led to a different outcome?
It's hard to say for sure, but it's a question worth considering. Some experts believe that a more empathetic approach, one that focuses on communication, could be more effective in these scenarios, especially when you're dealing with teenagers. Imagine an approach that recognizes those heightened emotions that young people often experience and focuses on building rapport and really listening to their concerns. That might help reduce those tensions and prevent things from spiraling out of control.
That shift in approach, it seems like it could really make a difference. We also see the mother in the video, and she's directly challenging the officers. She's questioning their authority, and she's expressing her anger and frustration. How should officers handle those interactions with parents who are, understandably upset and potentially confrontational? It feels like a delicate balance for everyone involved.
It's a tightrope walk, for sure. On the one hand, officers, they have to maintain control and keep themselves safe. But on the other hand, they need to be respectful and understanding toward parents who are naturally going to be worried about and protective of their kids. Things like active listening, clear communication, and a willingness to explain the situation calmly can really go a long way in diffusing tension and stopping things from escalating further.
Those communication skills, they seem absolutely vital in these situations. I'm also struck by how the officer in the video, he was really focused on figuring out who actually lived in the apartment complex. That seems like a pretty common issue for police, especially in more densely populated areas. How do officers usually handle those gray areas where it's not immediately obvious who belongs and who doesn't?
It can be pretty complex. Officers often have to use a combination of observation, careful questioning, and sometimes even checking records to try and determine a person's residency. They might look for clues, like mail with the person's name on it, or ask neighbors for confirmation. In some cases, they might even contact property managers or landlords to verify residency. It's a bit like putting together a puzzle.
It sounds like a lot of detective work, especially in a tense and rapidly changing situation like the one in the video. I imagine it's tough to gather all that information quickly and accurately when you're also trying to manage a crowd and keep everything safe.
Exactly. And that's why it's so important for officers to use good judgment, avoid jumping to conclusions, and be really thorough in their investigations before taking any action. Mistakenly detaining someone based on inaccurate or incomplete information, that can have some serious consequences. Not just for the person being detained, but also for the community's trust in law enforcement. It can really damage relationships and make it harder for police to do their jobs effectively.
It feels like there's this delicate balance between respecting individual rights and keeping communities safe. We want people to feel like they can be in public spaces without being harassed or questioned unfairly, but we also want to make sure that our communities are safe and that the police have the resources they need to prevent crime and respond effectively to potentially dangerous situations. How do we find that balance, that sweet spot, where individual rights and community safety are both being upheld?
Well, that's a fundamental question we keep coming back to in so many discussions about policing and civil liberties, right? It's complicated with no easy answers, but I think it starts with open and honest conversations and a genuine willingness to consider different points of view. We need to have those tough conversations, even when they're uncomfortable, about the role of law enforcement in a free society. We need to talk about the limits of police authority and the importance of protecting individual rights while making sure the public is safe. It's about finding that middle ground where both are respected and protected.
Finding that middle ground, that seems crucial, and this video really makes us confront those difficult questions and grapple with the complexities of policing in our communities. It's a stark reminder that these issues, they're not just theoretical. They have real consequences for people and communities.
Exactly, and I think it's really important for all of us to participate in these conversations thoughtfully and respectfully, recognizing that there are multiple valid perspectives and that finding real solutions takes empathy, a deep understanding of the issues, and a commitment to finding common ground. It's not about us versus them. It's about working together to create a system that works for everyone fairly and effectively.
The fact that there are bystanders present adds another layer to this whole situation. We see people recording the encounter on their phones, but nobody seems to be actively trying to de-escalate the situation or intervene.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on the role of bystanders in these kinds of situations, especially now with social media and citizen journalism being so prevalent?
That's a really interesting aspect of this case. The bystanders, especially those recording the incident, they add this whole new dimension to these types of encounters. It raises questions about individual responsibility, how social media can impact interactions between police and citizens, and whether having citizens document these events can lead to more accountability. It's kind of a double-edged sword.
It's like everyone's watching, but nobody is stepping up to try to change the dynamic or calm things down.
There's a growing discussion about whether bystanders should intervene when they see potential police misconduct. Some people argue that bystanders have a moral obligation to speak out, document what's happening, or even physically intervene if it's safe. They think citizens have a responsibility to hold law enforcement accountable. But others caution that getting involved in police actions can be dangerous, and recording incidents without context can lead to misunderstandings and might even make things worse. It's a tricky situation to navigate.
It's a tough call for sure. We also hear the officer in the video, he repeatedly tells people to kick rocks if they don't live in the apartment complex. And that language, it comes across as dismissive and even disrespectful. Do you think officers should be more mindful of the language they use when interacting with the public, especially in already tense situations?
Definitely. The way an officer speaks and their demeanor can have a big influence on how people perceive them and their actions. Using respectful and professional language is really important for building trust and maintaining good community relations. Even in difficult or stressful situations, officers should try to communicate clearly and calmly and avoid using language that could be seen as degrading or antagonistic. It's about setting the right tone and showing respect for the individuals they're interacting with, even when those individuals are upset or not cooperating.
It's about treating everyone with dignity, no matter the circumstances. It seems like this entire incident really highlights the importance of training and professional development for police officers. especially when it comes to things like communication skills, de-escalation techniques, and cultural sensitivity. Those things seem crucial for building positive relationships with the communities they serve.
You're absolutely right. Ongoing training and education are essential. Officers need to be equipped to handle the complexities and ever-changing challenges of modern policing. This means training on implicit bias, conflict resolution, mental health awareness, and trauma-informed approaches to interacting with the public. It's about moving beyond that traditional, purely authoritative style of policing and adopting a more community-oriented and empathetic approach.
It feels like we're talking about a fundamental shift in police culture, moving away from that us versus them mentality and toward a more collaborative and understanding approach.
That's a great way to put it. It's about building bridges, fostering trust, and recognizing that effective policing requires more than just enforcing the law. It needs understanding the needs of the community, communicating effectively, and being genuinely committed to serving and protecting the people. It's about building partnerships and working together to create a safer and more just environment for everyone.
This deep dive is really making me think about all the different aspects of policing and how we can work together to make those positive changes in our communities. This deep dive is really making me think about all the different facets of policing and how we can work together to create those positive changes in our communities.
Yeah, and I think this incident, it also highlights those challenges that police face when they're interacting with young people, especially in those kind of volatile situations.
Right.
There's a lot of debate right now about, what are the best de-escalation techniques and whether officers are getting adequate training to deal with, teenagers who might be acting out or maybe reacting emotionally in the heat of the moment.
That tension, yeah, you can really feel it in the video. The officers seem to take a very authoritative approach. They're demanding compliance, and they resort to handcuffs pretty quickly. Do you think that maybe a different approach could have de-escalated things and maybe led to a different outcome?
It's hard to say for certain, but it's worth exploring. Some experts argue that a more empathetic and communicative approach might be more effective in these scenarios, especially with teenagers.
Yeah.
Imagine like an approach that acknowledges those heightened emotions that young people often experience and focuses on building rapport and actually listening to their concerns. That might help, reduce those tensions and keep things from getting out of control.
That shift in approach, yeah, it seems like it could really make a difference. We also see the mother in the video, and she's directly challenging the officers. She's questioning their authority, expressing her anger and frustration. How do you think officers should best navigate those interactions with parents who are understandably upset and potentially confrontational? It feels like a delicate balance for everyone involved.
Yeah. It is. It's a tightrope walk for sure.
Yeah.
On the one hand, officers have a duty to, maintain control of the situation to make sure that they're safe. But at the same time, they also need to be respectful and understanding towards parents who are naturally going to be, concerned, protective of their kids.
Right.
Active listening, communicating clearly, and a willingness to just explain the situation calmly. That can go a long way in diffusing tension and preventing things from escalating.
Yeah, those communication skills, they seem absolutely vital in these situations. I'm also struck by how the officer in the video was really trying to determine who actually lives in the apartment complex and who was just visiting.
Right.
That feels like a pretty common challenge for police officers, especially in densely populated areas. How do officers typically navigate those gray areas where it's not immediately clear who belongs and who doesn't?
It can be quite complex, for sure.
Mm-hmm.
Officers often have to rely on a combination of observation, careful questioning, and sometimes even checking records to try and figure out a person's residency.
Mm-hmm.
They might look for signs of belonging, like, is there mail with the person's name on it? Or they might ask neighbors to confirm.
Right.
In some cases, they might even contact property managers or landlords to verify residency. It's like piecing together a puzzle sometimes.
It sounds like a lot of detective work.
Yeah.
Especially in a tense and rapidly evolving situation like the one we see in the video.
Right.
I imagine it's really challenging to gather all that information quickly and accurately when you're also trying to manage a crowd and make sure everything stays safe.
Exactly. And that's why it's crucial for officers to really use, sound judgment, avoid making those hasty assumptions, and be incredibly thorough in their investigations before they take any action. Because mistakenly detaining someone based on bad information or incomplete information, that can have serious consequences, not just for the individual being detained, but also for the community's trust in law enforcement. It can damage relationships and make it much harder for the police to do their jobs effectively.
It feels like a delicate balancing act between respecting individual rights and ensuring community safety. On the one hand, we want people to feel like they can gather in public spaces without being harassed or questioned unfairly. But on the other hand, we want to make sure that communities are safe and that the police have the tools they need to, prevent crime and respond to those potentially dangerous situations. How do we as a society, how do we find that equilibrium where individual rights and community safety are both upheld?
That's really the fundamental question at the heart of so many debates about policing and civil liberties, isn't it? It's a complex issue and there's no easy answers. But I think it begins with having these open and honest dialogues and a willingness to truly consider different viewpoints. We need to have those conversations, even the uncomfortable ones, about the role of law enforcement in a free society, the limits of police authority, and how important it is to protect individual rights while also ensuring public safety. It's about finding that common ground, that middle ground, where both are respected and upheld.
Finding that middle ground, that seems absolutely crucial. And in this video, it really forces us to confront those tough questions and grapple with how complex policing is in our communities. It's a stark reminder that these issues, they're not just theoretical, they have real-world consequences for individuals and for communities.
Exactly. And I think it's so important for all of us to engage in these conversations thoughtfully and respectfully. Recognizing that there are multiple valid perspectives out there and finding lasting solutions. It requires empathy, a deep understanding of the issues, and a real commitment to finding common ground. It's not about us versus them. It's about working together to create a system that works for everyone fairly and effectively.
The presence of bystanders, that adds another layer to this situation as well. We see several people recording the encounter on their phones, but nobody seems to be stepping in or trying to de-escalate things. What are your thoughts on the role of bystanders in these types of situations, especially in this age of, social media and citizen journalism?
That's a really fascinating aspect of this case, isn't it? The bystanders, particularly the ones who are recording, they add this whole new dimension to these encounters. It raises questions about individual responsibility, how social media is influencing those interactions between police and citizens, and whether having citizens document these things, if that can actually create a level of accountability. It's kind of a double-edged sword.
It's like everyone's an observer, but nobody's actually stepping up to change the dynamic or try to calm things down.
Right, and there's this growing debate about the role of bystander intervention in these situations where, there might be potential police misconduct. Some people believe that, bystanders have a moral obligation to speak up or document what's happening, or even, physically intervene if they can do it safely. They believe that citizens have a responsibility to hold law enforcement accountable. Others, though, they caution that interfering with police actions, that can be dangerous. And recording these incidents without any context, it can lead to misunderstandings, and it might even escalate tensions.
Right. It's a tough call for sure. We also hear the officer in the video, and he keeps telling people to kick rocks if they don't live in the apartment complex. And that language, it just feels dismissive and even a little disrespectful. Do you think that officers should be more mindful of the language they're using, especially in these tense situations?
Absolutely. An officer's language and their demeanor, it can have a huge impact on how people perceive them and their actions. Using respectful and professional language, that's essential for building trust and having good community relations. Even in difficult or stressful situations, officers should, try to communicate clearly and calmly and avoid using language that could be seen as, demeaning or antagonistic.
Right.
It's about setting the right tone and showing respect for the people that they're interacting with, even when those individuals might be, upset or not complying.
It's about treating everyone with dignity, regardless of the circumstances. It seems like this whole incident, it really highlights how important training and professional development are for police officers, especially when it comes to things like communication skills and de-escalation techniques and cultural sensitivity. Those elements seem so crucial for building positive relationships with the communities they serve.
You've hit on a key point there.
Yep.
Ongoing training and education, they're absolutely vital for making sure that officers are equipped to handle, those complex and constantly evolving challenges of modern policing.
Right.
This includes, training on implicit bias and conflict resolution and mental health awareness and also trauma-informed approaches to interacting with the public. It's about moving beyond that traditional kind of authoritative approach to policing and embracing something more community-oriented and empathetic.
Yeah, it feels like we're talking about like a fundamental shift in police culture, moving away from that us versus them mentality and towards something that's more collaborative and understanding.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. It's about building bridges, fostering trust, and recognizing that effective policing, it requires more than just, enforcing laws. It requires understanding the needs of the community and communicating well and being truly committed to serving and protecting the people. It's about building those partnerships and working together to create a safer and more just environment for everyone.
This deep dive, it's really making me think about all the different sides of policing and how we can all work together to create those positive changes in our communities.
We spent a lot of time talking about the roles of, the police, the teenagers, even the bystanders in this whole incident. But what about the community as a whole? Is there anything that communities can do to proactively prevent these kinds of situations from happening in the first place? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a really important question. And this incident, it really underscores how crucial, strong community police relationships are. When you have those relationships built on trust and mutual respect, that can make a huge difference. Communities, they can play a really active role by engaging in those open and honest dialogues with law enforcement, participating in community policing initiatives, and advocating for policies that really promote fairness and transparency in policing. It's about taking ownership and being part of the solution. It sounds like you're suggesting a shift from just reacting to incidents after they've happened to working together proactively to create that safer and more just environment for everyone. It's about prevention rather than just reaction.
That's exactly right. It's about fostering a culture of understanding and communication and collaboration between law enforcement and the communities they serve.
Right.
This involves, addressing those underlying social issues that often contribute to crime and promoting those youth development programs and creating those opportunities for positive interactions between police officers and young people. Building those relationships early on that can have a really big impact.
Yeah, it makes sense. We can't just religion the police to solve all of our problems. It really does take that collective effort, a community-wide commitment to make those lasting changes. It's about recognizing that everybody has a stake in this.
Absolutely. Building safer and more just communities, it takes everyone being involved. It's about working together, really listening to each other's perspectives and concerns and finding solutions that benefit everyone. It's not about pointing fingers or placing blame. It's about coming together to create a better future for everyone.
I think that's a really powerful message to take away from this deep dive. We've covered a lot from the specifics of this incident to those broader questions about policing and community relations and individual rights. It feels like we've only just scratched the surface of these really complex issues, but it's a good starting point.
I agree. These are ongoing conversations, dialogues that we need to keep having as a society.
Yeah.
And by engaging in these conversations and listening to those diverse viewpoints and seeking that common ground, we can create real positive change and build those stronger, more resilient communities. Mm-hmm. It's a process, and it's not always easy, but it's essential.
Well, this deep dive has definitely been thought-provoking and eye-opening. As we wrap up, what's the one key takeaway you hope our listener will walk away with today?
I think the most important thing to keep in mind is to try to understand the complexity of these situations.
Right.
It's really easy to jump to conclusions or make assumptions based on limited information, especially in our fast-paced, social media-driven world. But the reality is that these encounters, they're incredibly nuanced, and they involve real people with their own unique stories and perspectives and experiences. Let's approach these issues with empathy, a willingness to listen, and a real commitment to finding those solutions that work for everybody involved. That's how we can move forward.
That's a great point. This deep dive has been a powerful reminder that we need to move beyond, those overly simplistic narratives, and we need to engage in those thoughtful, nuanced conversations about the challenges we're facing as a society. And that starts with recognizing the shared humanity in everyone involved, from the police officers to the teenagers to the community members who are all trying to navigate these really complex situations. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we hope that you'll continue to think about these important issues and be a part of the conversation.
We've spent a lot of time talking about, the roles of the police and the teenagers and even the bystanders in this incident. But what about the community as a whole? Is there anything that communities can do to be proactive, and maybe help prevent these kinds of situations from happening in the first place? What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's a really important question. And this incident, it really highlights how important it is to have those strong relationships between the community and the police. When you have those relationships built on trust and mutual respect, I think that can make a huge difference. Communities can play a really active role, engaging in those open and honest dialogues with law enforcement and participating in community policing initiative and advocating for policies that really promote fairness and transparency in policing. It's about, taking ownership and being part of the solution.
That's exactly right. It's about fostering that culture of understanding and communication and collaboration between law enforcement and the communities that they serve. And this involves, addressing those underlying social issues that often lead to crime, and promoting youth development programs and creating those opportunities for positive interactions between police officers and young people. Building those relationships early on, that can have a really significant impact.
It makes sense. We can't just expect the police to solve all of our problems. It takes a collective effort, a community-wide commitment to create that lasting change. It's about understanding that everyone has a role to play in this.
Absolutely. Building safer and more just communities, it requires everyone to get involved. It's about working together and really listening to each other's perspectives and concerns and finding solutions that work for everybody. It's not about pointing fingers or blaming people. It's about coming together to create a better future for all of us.
I think that's a really powerful message to take away from this deep dive. We've covered so much, from the details of this particular incident to those bigger questions about policing and community relations and individual rights. It feels like we've only scratched the surface of these complex issues, but it's definitely a starting point.
Yeah, I agree. These are ongoing conversations and dialogues that we need to keep having as a society.
Oh, absolutely.
And by engaging in these conversations and listening to different viewpoints and trying to find that common ground, we can really create positive change and build those stronger, more resilient communities. It's a process, and it's not always easy, but it's absolutely essential.
Well, this deep dive has definitely been thought-provoking and eye-opening. As we wrap things up here, what's the one key takeaway you hope our listener will walk away with today?
I think the most important thing is just to remember to try to understand how complex these situations really are. It's so easy to just jump to conclusions or make assumptions based on limited information, especially in our fast-paced world with social media and everything. But the reality is that these encounters, they're incredibly nuanced, and they involve real people with their own unique stories and perspectives and experiences. So let's try to approach these issues with empathy and a willingness to listen, and a real commitment to finding those solutions that work for everyone involved. That's how we can move forward.
Yeah, that's such a great point. This deep dive has been a really powerful reminder that we need to move beyond those simple narratives and engage in those thoughtful, nuanced conversations about the challenges we face as a society. And that starts with recognizing the shared humanity in everyone involved, from the police officers to the teenagers to the community members who are all just trying to navigate these really complex situations. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and we hope that you'll continue to explore these important issues and be a part of the conversation.